A very good morning to everyone and thank you for joining in. This year, World Space Week celebration are bringing people together from around the world to celebrate women in space with variety of online events and interactive learning activities. The international celebration commemorates the achievement and contribution space science technology and its application. Women in Space, with this theme, will try to bring more awareness to the issue of gender diversity in the space sector. To talk more on this topic, we have with us Dr. Mila Mitra from STEM in Space, co founder and chief scientific officer with us. Dr. Mila is passionate about dissemination of science, specifically through astronomy and earth sciences to students and public in easy and innovative ways through science outreach and communication. Her experience includes at reputed aerospace companies such as NASA, Goddard, NASA AMES, and Stanford Linear Accelerator Center in US, which has given her the opportunity to build international global experience. Planetarium welcome you, ma'am, for sharing this presentation with all the budding mind who are online.
Hello, everyone. Welcome today. As she mentioned, as Prerna ma'am mentioned, this week is World Space Week. So, World Space Week is celebrated on between October 4th to October 10th every year, and it's an annual event initiated by the UN, and it celebrates. It's a public celebration of space. It's to make people aware of the benefits of space exploration. So this year the theme is Women in Space. So thank you, Planetarium, for inviting me as a woman in space myself to talk about women in space. What is the history? What are the challenges they faced? And what are the achievements that women in space have been able to get to more in recent times? So again, everyone, welcome, and let's listen to this, interesting history as I talk about how it started and where we are now. So some of you might know that the first space flight was in 1961. And in fact, we did have the first woman in space. Many of you know her, know of her, Valentina Tereshkova, and I will be speaking more on her. She was also, her first launch was in 1963. So that was only 2 years later after the first human launch. In 1983, Sally Ride became the third woman and the first American woman to go into space. So that's 20 years later. Okay, so for 20 years, women were not focused on. So by now, there have been 570 people or so to have gone into space, and only 65 have been women. That's only 11%. No woman has yet walked on the moon. So, as of March 2021, that's this year, 65 women have flown in space, and that includes cosmonauts, astronauts, specialists, and people who've gone to the space station. The number might have changed by now, but it's pretty close to that. So, you see, it's a small number. So, let's find out the background. So, which countries have sent women to space? Most of the 65 women are from the United States, and they have gone on space shuttle launches as well as to the International Space Station. There are many countries that have sent one or two women to space. That includes UK, France, South Korea. Of course, USSR has had several, or maybe just a couple. Uh, China. Recently, there was a UAE come US joint mission. Okay, so now let's look at And this is a gender bias, of course, women in STEM in general face. But let's discuss, do they face more challenges to go to space? So, what does the research say? Do women face physical or psychological challenges in spaceflight? So, again, space flight and space exploration is a tough challenge, no matter if you're a man or a woman, because you're going to unknown places. You're going to face environments that are unknown. So you don't know how the space environment, the radiation, being in microgravity, how all these will work on your body. So women may face some of the same difficulties as men. uh, of course, all of these people are heroes, men and women, because you're just going into challenges that are unknown. So scientific studies have shown that there are no adverse effects from short time space missions. Nowadays, astronauts are trying to stay longer, and the famous cases of an astronaut whose twin was left on the Earth. And so they tried to compare, and he spent 1 year in space. This was recently, and they wanted to see what effects space would have on his body. So right now we are doing these kind of experiments because in in the future, if we do try to go to other colonies like Mars or the moon and try to set up some human exploration bases, then we need to know the effects of space. And the first step to do that is in places like ISS, International Space Station, because that is low earth orbit. So you're not that far out, but you do get the experience of what it will be like in space. So, yes, the woman might psychologically at least even be better suited for longer space missions. The main obstacle that women have faced is gender discrimination, not physical or psychological challenges. And as I go through my webinar today, I'll talk a bit more about, what kind of how they have risen to the challenge. So let's take some examples of discrimination that the women in space exploration faced. Space programs allowed women only very recently, with NASA opening its space program in 1976. In 1983, Sally Ride, as I mentioned, became the first female US astronaut, and even she was asked questions by the press about with would she cry if things went wrong on the job. Then in a TV interview she was asked if she had remembered to pack her makeup. So they even such famous people, and that she was going to be the pioneer, have faced attitudes like that. Women with children have been faced about with questions about how they would deal with motherhood if they are in space. So, yes, this is Shannon Lucid faced this question by the press on how children would handle her being in space. Okay, so what are the physical effects of space on women? And these are the results I'm showing you are from research, and research is ongoing. This is kind of a new field. So, this is ongoing. So, what are the main physiological changes that any astronaut faces? Some of you might know these answers. It's very challenging for astronauts because you are in microgravity, which means you're almost in zero gravity, even in the ISS. So you can have loss of bone and muscle mass. You have cosmic ray dangers. Then you have the temperature and vacuum change, and of course psychological stress, because you're locked into a small area with just a few people for at least 1 month and maybe a year. And all this poses a lot of psychological stress. But we do need to get astronauts acclimatized to this kind of stress, because if you're going to go to Mars and settle down, then you don't know when you're coming back. So it is very important that astronauts are understand this kind of solitude and how to interact with just your companions. So this is a very good test. But Yes, these kind of physiological challenges and problems will be there on each and every astronaut, whether you're male or female. Okay, so things that are specific to women's health, such as menstruation, but now it has been the result is that it can be dealt with as a matter of routine. So here's an interesting thing: astronaut astronaut clothing, as some of you know, because you have to face all these issues of uh, you know protection from cosmic rays, then how to balance the gravity, and so on, and how to help you breathe through oxygen tanks, especially if you're doing an extravehicular activity, which means a spacewalk. So, astronaut suits were designed with all these thoughts in mind, but it was designed for men. And in fact, there was a very famous case. I'll talk to you in a little while about that, where a woman astronaut was selected to do an EVA, which is a spacewalk, but she could not be sent because none of the astronaut suits that were designed for EVA could fit a woman. So she was not even sent. So for something as trivial as astronaut clothing, which were designed with men's sizes, uh, you know, uh, the first woman who was being considered for EVA could not be sent. And since then, astronaut suits have been reconfigured for women, keeping these kind of things, EVA and microgravity environments, in mind. Space toilet designs even did not have women in mind until recently, when the first toilet with better designs for women was delivered to the ISS. And as you know, International Space Station ISS, several women astronauts go and stay for months at a time. Okay, so a study on fertility reported that short duration missions should not affect the ability of astronauts to conceive and bear healthy children. So NASA has not permitted pregnant astronauts to fly in space, but that is the same kind of rule that even air flight has. So in tests, it is found that there are some differences in how space affects men and women, and like I told you, these are ongoing studies, ongoing research. But again, some of these are common differences that you would find even on Earth. So, yes, so men show a bias towards speed over accuracy. If you see the first lettering on the top, then women show a bias towards accuracy over speed. So there are different, men have more vision impairment when they come back, whereas women have not shown any vision impairment. And same with hearing. Uh, Okay, so muscle and bone loss has varied not by gender, but by person to person. So urinary tract infections are have been found to be more common for women, but I believe that's the same for women versus men on Earth. So there are no specific strong gender differences. There are some minor differences, but that should be compensated for, because space exploration itself is a challenge. Now, I'm going to talk to you. I've been talking to you about what kind of challenges women might face. Is there a basis for psychological or physiological uh, gender bias for women in space exploration? And the answer is there are no significant reasons. So women should be, encouraged to get out there more, to be part of space exploration. And with that, now I'll come to some huge achievements that were attained by women explorers and women astronauts. So now 60 women from 9 countries have made 138 space flights, with many of the women astronauts doing multiple space flights. So women have flown as mission specialists, as pilots. They have been commanders. They have, done extravehicular activity spacewalks and deployed and retrieved satellites. So they have conducted all kinds of scientific research. So with that, I just want to point out that they have taken all the roles in space exploration, when they go as part of these space missions. In 2007, in fact, it was not the first spacewalk, but it was a milestone spacewalk because two women spacewalked at the same time: Shuttle Commander Pam Melroy and Space Station Commander Peggy Whitson. Because shuttles used to carry the space shuttles, which now that program has is no longer working. It was stopped by the US, but for many years it was the shuttles that carried astronauts to the space station, and the astronauts who had already been there would come back with the same shuttle. Okay, so this was a milestone spacewalk where two astronauts, actually, two female commanders, did a spacewalk together. In 2010, during the STS 131 Discovery mission to the ISS, four women were in space at the same time. That's the picture in between. So there were four women in space at the same time. That's the most ever. So these are some of the achievements. Some more notable first. This slide has a lot of text, but I'm going to lead you to some of these one by one. Okay, so you all know that Valentina Tereshkova was the first cosmonaut. And after that, the second cosmonaut was also from Roscosmos, which is Russia. And that was Svetlana Savitskaya. Okay, so the first black woman, Mae Jemison, flew to the space shuttle in 1992. And so on. So many of these I'm going to talk about. So let's go now and discuss. I'm going to show you highlights of several women who have been astronauts, followed by several women who have really pushed space research and space exploration behind the scenes in many different countries. So let's go ahead and talk about some of these pioneer women and some of these, women who have made history one by one. Okay, before that, here is a picture, snapshot of some of the first astronauts that have gone from different countries and the year of flight. And again, here you will see that Valentina Tereshkova flew in 1963, and after that, it was only in 1983 that women were sent more regularly. Okay, so first woman in space, I bet you all know that, all the students know that, um Valentina Tereshkova. So, before I talk about this, let me ask you, why do you think men were sent in the first 20 years? Why were men selected in the first year? Because it was thought that the qualities and requirements of what you need to be when you go to space are things like physical fitness, alertness, ability to deal quickly with things, and for that, maybe correctly, they picked from the pilots and Air Force. So these kind of profiles were the ones that astronauts were selected from. And in general, those kind of profiles had more men and younger men. So it's not just a bias against women, it's also actually a bias against, age and even diversity, because a certain kind of young men go into professions like pilot or air force, and these are where astronauts were first selected from. Now, Valentina Tereshkova was the first cosmonaut who was selected. Not only that, not only was she the first woman in space, she was also the youngest woman in space. Since then, that number has changed very recently, but she was the youngest woman in space. She was the first civilian in space, and she was the only woman to fly solo in space. So her background was a little different. For this mission, at that point, the Roscosmos said that they do not need a pilot or or an Air Force kind of person. They said it was fine to be other professions, and she was an engineer. And why did they say that? Because most of the flight was automated. Only they would have to control the parachutes when they landed. She was in space for 3 days. She was selected from a large group of civilians only. She was only 26th when she launched solo. Remember, just imagine how brave she might have been to launch solo aboard a spacecraft. And she said this. She said this to BBC. It made me happy for womankind. It proved that they could be equal with men, not only on Earth but also in space. Valentina Tereshkova, since then till now, and she's alive now, she's been very active in human space exploration. And, she's very active in the Roscosmos program. And she said that I would enjoy flying to Mars. I'm ready to fly without coming back. So imagine the mental strength you have to be able to say that, because people who go to Mars, you really don't know when you're going to be coming back. So moving on to the second cosmonaut. I don't know if everybody knows Valentina Tereshkova, but this is also a name to remember. Svetlana Savitskaya. She was the second woman to travel to space, and it was 19 years later. It was 19 years later after Valentina Tereshkova, and she launched in 1982 and returned to Earth 7 days later. So she was the first woman to fly to space twice and the first woman to spacewalk. So she was a daredevil, and as you know, most astronauts still have to be very brave. So she had completed 450 parachute jumps at the age of 17. So many of you joining me for this talk today might be in high school. So can you imagine that at your age she had completed 450 parachute jumps? She was trained as a test pilot and was first, she was part of a all woman flight squad. So definitely she was, had the profile to be selected as a cosmonaut. But still, despite all these qualifications, she had already proved herself to be a test pilot. She had proved herself. uh, Even then, when she entered Salyut 7, which was the mission she was going on, she was presented with an apron and told to get to work by a fellow cosmonaut. So even even between your peers, you were getting that kind of humoring and treatment. Sally Ride is again a name which is very well known in the space exploration community. She was the first American woman in space. She was a physicist, and she flew aboard NASA's space shuttle STS 7, and she was one of the first who operated the robotic arm that the space, that is used to deploy satellites. She and five other women were in NASA's first astronaut class that accepted women. This was in 1978. So she recalls that older men astronauts, because they were so comfortable with men going to space with them, they were not sure about how to act around female crew. And Sally Ride, being the first American woman astronaut, she actually, there are many incidents that she faced from the press. They asked her, "Do you plan to ever have children? Will you wear makeup to space?" So imagine somebody who's such a pioneer and going off to space exploration as the first woman had to deal with such questions. Later on, Sally Ride became famous not only as an astronaut, but she was the first person to serve on two investigative panels for both the Challenger and Columbia shuttle disasters. As you might know, these were two famous disasters. In one of them, our own astronaut, Kalpana Chawla, was also killed. So Sally Ride was one of the investigative panels. She was in the panel that investigated why this could have happened, why this kind of disaster took place. So later on, Sally Ride left NASA and created the Sally Ride Institute that promote interest in STEM topics, science, technology, engineering, math, for girls. So many of you might, if you look at Sally Ride page, you'll see that there are many programs, not just for girls, but many of you youngsters can do these programs. And in fact, we ourselves bring some of these programs to our students. So do take a look. She is very active. She recently passed away, but she was very active in promoting girls in STEM. Here's another first. Mae Jemison was the first black woman in space. She was an accomplished engineer and doctor, and by now the profile was changing so that astronauts were not only pilots or from Air Force, but they were taking in engineers, and of course, you need doctors and scientists. So these profiles were also being used to select NASA astronauts. So in 1992, she orbited the Earth on Space Shuttle for 8 days, becoming the first black woman in space. Peggy Whitson. I know I'm sharing a lot of names, but I want to highlight women in space exploration who did a first, because each of them achieved something that, another rung of the ladder they climbed and made available to women what they had not done before. Okay, so Peggy Whitson was the first female commander of ISS, International Space Station. She was a biochemist. She was the first female commander of the ISS, but she's also the woman who spent the longest total time in space, which is a total of 665 days. She's done 10 total spacewalks, 10 total EVAs. So 10, imagine, she's walked outside the shuttle, done spacewalks 10 times. So Whitson became the oldest woman to undertake a spacewalk, and now she's also in the astronaut office. She was the first female chief of NASA's astronaut office. So she has recently announced that she will be the commander of a SpaceX mission that is going to go in 2022. Okay, so a little while back, I talked to you about astronaut Anne McClain, who missed the chance of doing a spacewalk, the first American spacewalk. She missed the chance because there was no spacesuit in a female size. And of course, when you're doing an extravehicular activity outside your space station, then your suit is very important because that is what is protecting you from cosmic rays, from giving you the right air and oxygen, giving you the right communications. So, astronaut Anne McClain missed that opportunity. She missed going down in history just because of a reason that there was no spacesuit that fit women. So after that, spacesuits were re-engineered, and in 2019 there was a historic all-female spacewalk when engineer Christina Koch and marine biologist and physiologist Jessica Meyer, they both worked together and upgraded a faulty battery unit on the ISS. So that's the first time two women astronauts did a spacewalk together. So Koch also went on to break the record for longest continuous time in space. That was 328 days. So I'm going to talk about the Artemis program towards the end of my webinar. That's a new program coming up that is trying to, one of the objectives of Artemis is to bring in more women astronauts and to land the first woman to the moon surface. So Christina Koch is one of the selected astronauts for that mission also. Now, this is another big name, Kathy Sullivan. She not only helped launch, but she helped also repair the Hubble Space Telescope. All of you know about the Hubble Space Telescope. Kathy Sullivan is one of the big names who was an astronaut who helped deploy it as well as repair it, because Hubble Space Telescope needed a repair, few months after launch. So, they deal with danger too. She was at one point during an EVA, she was trying to fix the Hubble Space Telescope solar arrays after they jammed. But yeah, some of them have faced problems when they were spacewalking. Okay, so she became America's first female spacewalker. And not only has she explored the heights of space, she's also explored the depths of Earth. If you see the last line, in 2020, she became the first woman to dive to the Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench, which is the deepest part of the Earth's oceans. So I'm just sharing this point because you can see what mental makeup these women space explorers have, what kind of makeup they have, how brave they are, and how they are explorers that, reach out and explore all parts of wherever they can get to. Eileen Collins was the first female to fly the space shuttle. She was also the first female commander of the shuttle mission. Okay, and I'll end this, list of pioneer women with Wally Funk. I don't know in the chat if the chat is live. Does anybody remember Wally Funk from something that happened this year? Wally Funk has now become the oldest person to go to space. This summer, she flew at age 82, flying on, if you remember, in the last few months, there were three civilian flights. These are suborbital flights. They just went to the edge between atmosphere and space and turned back. So she went on one of these flights, which was Blue Origin's New Shepard, it was called. And she was the oldest person. And the interesting thing, I want to share her story. You might now know her as the oldest person, but in her history, in her background, this is what happened. She volunteered for the Women in Space program in 1961, and she was selected as part of the Mercury 13 program, which was 13 women astronaut trainees. So they were all taken through physical tests and simulations and sensory deprivation. Sensory deprivation means you're deprived of the full level of oxygen. And she passed these tests with higher scores than most men, showing that even physically she was equipped to deal with challenges that men astronauts were facing. Still, the program was scrapped, and now after so many years, she was able to go to space and fulfill her dream at the age of 82. I'll talk a little bit about Indian woman in space, or American Indian woman, a woman of Indian origin, because you know these names very well, and let's find out a bit about them. You know the name of Kalpana Chawla. She's an Indian American astronaut and engineer who was the first woman of Indian origin to go to space. Kalpana Chawla was actually born in India and she migrated at a very young age. She studied in India. She did her PhD in the US at University of Colorado and began working as a scientist and engineer at NASA. In 1994, she was selected as an astronaut candidate and she went for her first mission in 1997. The shuttle made 252 orbits of the Earth. In 2000, she went for a second mission as a mission specialist. Again, that mission went well, but unfortunately, on return, the space shuttle blew up during landing as it was coming back through the atmosphere because of some faulty parts, and this killed all the astronauts. So, Kalpana Chawla again was a pioneer, and as a pioneer, you have to face challenges. So I'll talk about the second Indian origin astronaut woman who you all know about. This was Sunita Williams. Sunita Williams was actually born in the US itself. She had an Indian origin father. So she was an American astronaut. She has logged more than 3,000 flight hours. Formerly, I mean, till recently, she held the records for most spacewalks by a woman, which is 7, and most spacewalk time for a woman. She's a veteran of 2 missions, and she is also being trained and also helping the mission which is Boeing's Starliner. That is going to be another civilian mission that will take tourists to space, and she is helping them in that mission and she will be a mission specialist on that mission. And only recently, again this year, we also have Shirisha Bandla, who is Indian origin too. She went to space as part of Virgin Galactic's um, first fully crewed flight test to the edge of space, again in July 2021. So it's all very recent. So we have a third Indian origin woman astronaut, but she was not an astronaut by profession. But in this mission, they took engineers who were only trained as astronauts for a few months to show that civilians could also manage in space. And in fact, she was a mission specialist who was recording the human experience, the tourism experience, and the user interface that would be deployed. So I've talked about women astronauts, about women who went to space. And this talk about women in space would not be complete without hearing a little bit about women behind the scenes, who were women scientists and engineers, who were the first ones who also faced discrimination, but they were able to help a lot in famous missions. Okay, so the first name, and I'll just bring in only a few names. First name is Katherine Johnson. Even in that time and age when the first missions had started, she was brilliant enough that her calculations of orbital mechanics were the ones being used for the first US human space flights. She earned a reputation for complex manual calculations, and not only that, she pioneered the use of computers to perform these kind of tasks for of calculating trajectories, how a spacecraft should maneuver, how it should reach an orbit. These are very complex calculations, and she is famous for being one of the first women who was in this field. But not only that, she was the first African American woman to work as a NASA scientist. So her calculations were used for the first astronauts, Alan Shepard, who was the first American in space, and John Glenn, who was the first American in orbit. It was crucial to the space shuttle program and also for a mission to Mars. So many years later, she has been recognized now. In 2015, she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Obama. And I hope you students can go and see this. This is streaming now. A movie was made about her and two other African American scientists and engineers, and this movie is called Hidden Figures. This movie brings to light the contributions of Black women to astrophysics. And this movie has greatly inspired women to go into space research and become scientists. So look at the last line. Were it not for the devoted, unique, and indispensable efforts of three Black women scientists, the US might not even have successfully sent people to space or to the moon and back. So in fact, it is their calculations that made such successful missions possible. So this is Hidden Figures. It's a book and a movie made in 2016. I'll mention a few rocket women of India. Minal Sampath became famous for the mission to Mars, or MOM as it was called. She was an Indian scientist. She is an Indian scientist and systems engineer with ISRO. She helped send the Mangalyaan space probe. For 2 years, she just worked in a windowless room for 18 hours a day to be ready for this project. Not only MOM, but Chandrayaan 2 even had two women rocket scientists at the helm. So Mutaya Vanita and Ritu Karidal, they were responsible for Chandrayaan 2 as project director, Vanita as project director, and Ritu Karidal as mission director. They are among 30% women of the team that worked on the Chandrayaan 2 project. So we've come a long way. We have women who are heading these missions, and 30% of the women of the team that worked on Chandrayaan 2 were also women. Let's see a small video. I'm not sure exactly sure if the sound will come through, but let's just watch a minute of it. And yes, so you saw that how women scientists have made a difference in major projects by ISRO, Chandrayaan 2 and mission to Mars. And Dr. Tessie Thomas was also one of the first people who started this by being involved as the project director of Agni 4 missile. She's known as the Missile Woman of India. Now, Gaganyaan, let's talk about the future. I'll talk about two future projects at the conclusion of my talk. Gaganyaan, as you know, that's going to be India's first manned space project, and it will it will start. There will be several missions, but the Gaganyaan mission will start sending Indian astronauts to space by 2022. And again, we are Lalitambika is one of the heads who is managing this project. Okay, so Gaganyaan, unfortunately, though, the first set of astronauts that have been selected is going on the same track. And of course, we do expect it as a starting mission. They will have the first four astronauts that have been selected are test pilots, and they are being trained right now. And we wish them all success in our first human spaceflight mission, Gaganyaan. But interestingly, there will be a woman android, woman robot that will go in one of the first missions. Okay, so the future, yeah, let's, this particular space race it's got, we've come a long way. Gender bias is being settled all over in all countries. People are dealing with gender bias in different fields. And of course, space exploration is one of the biggest fields where it may make a difference. So trailblazers such as the ones I've described to you will be the ones who are going to be inspiring a new generation of girls who hope to go to space or work with space exploration. Now, one thing I want to say is it's not just a question of gender bias. So, all the young students listening to me now, here's the main point: space exploration, as it will be in the future, is not just sending people to space anymore, not sending people just to ISS or eventually to the moon, but we are talking about space colonization, like building colonies on the moon as the first step, and then later on in Mars. So, in those places, a diversity of gender and nationalities, and even age will all become very important, because that colony is you're going to be your whole world. So you do need both genders. You do need people of different nationalities. So you cannot have a colony of just young men. Okay, so for reasons of propagating a colony, you will have to have people with different skills, different genders, diversity. So it's essential that more and more women are recruited for these kind of careers now. So recently, there was in 2014, that is, there was an extensive review in the Journal of Women's Health that looked at the effects of space on men and women. And these five recommendations were released: select more female astronauts, encourage the participation of both male and female subjects in more ground and flight research studies. Of course, you can't have the whole research based on space flight, so it has to be ground. Okay. So you need to include sex and gender factors in the design of the experiments, and so on. Okay, I'll end with the Artemis program. That's NASA's big program, which will also first go to the moon. And it's just not. It's going to be the objective is to land the first woman on the moon, also to land the first man of color on the moon. Artemis is the twin sister of Apollo, so it's named after a woman goddess. 9 women are among the 18 astronauts who have been selected for this Artemis mission. So we've come a long way to building space, including women in space exploration and behind the scenes. So with that, I hope all of you sitting there today, men, young boys, and young girls, are understand that it is important to encourage diversity in this. So women, please go ahead and go ahead in such careers. And I hope the young men here will also encourage and be a part of this change that is going to be happening in your generation. Thank you. With that, I close today's session.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation put all together. You yourself is the greatest example of women in space, because the work a teacher do after taking so much experience in such prestigious organization, you are utilizing that for the betterment of the coming future and spreading awareness about the space and astronomy education with the young mind. And one cannot deny the great role women have played in the world's community. It given the clear idea during your presentation. And I would like to quote a very beautiful quotation which I had just read, given by the Valentina Tereshkova. If a woman can be a railroad worker in Russia, why cannot she fly the space? It clearly depicts she looks up to the woman, and there is no limitation to the woman if she wants to work in any of the direction. So thank you, ma'am, for such a brilliant presentation. And with this, we'll open the session for some questions. If anyone would like to ask anything, are requested to drop in the chat box. I request please confine your thoughts related to the presentation only. Uh, Sarth Kumar, thank you for a beautiful presentation and excellent description of the subject matter by Dr. Mitra. My question: where do you think ISRO stand in comparison with the several private space company.
So as I mentioned, and I showed some videos, ISRO is of course doing excellently in in promoting women in space, and there have been so many rocket women who are at the head of uh, project directors and mission scientists. So yeah, ISRO is doing very well, and so is at least the US, and even UAE has sent their first astronaut. So I think ISRO is definitely doing very well and stands well in comparison to other private space companies in encouraging women to be at the head of such missions.
I think in continuation to his earlier question, he has also posted, what do you think will PARAS defense and space will add to the mix?
So unfortunately, sir, I'm not aware exactly about the details of this mission. So and I'm not sure that women are uh, going so much into the defense industry. Of course, DRDO also is involving more women, but I'm not sure to what level. So sorry about that. I'm not exactly able to answer this question.
We'll take the next. Priyanka Upadhyay. How many times did Soviet cosmonaut Valentina Tereshkova orbit the Earth in 71 hours?
Uh, so I'm not exactly sure of the answer, but yeah, normally you orbit the Earth about 16 times in 24 hours. So we'll go with that calculation.
And she also would like to know why do astronaut do spacewalk? Like I think she was interested the purpose of having the spacewalk.
Right. So sometimes, there are things that you have to do outside, like repair something. So remember the Hubble Space Telescope I talked about. So the Hubble Space Telescope needed actual repair by like the same kind of thing we do, which is like go and uh, uh, change the mirror. Actually, in that case it was, but people need to go and use tools and shift something or work with their hands and tools. So not all of it can be done inside from the ISS. Either you're repairing something outside the ISS or you're repairing another mission. So for that, you have to physically go outside and work on the mission from outside. So you are mostly tethered. So you're tethered means you are connected still with a rope to the uh, to your shuttle or to the ISS, so you can be pulled back in. But you have to physically go outside and fix whatever needs fixing. So mainly it is for repair work or to add something new.
Who was the first woman to land on moon, or it will happen when?
Yes, so that's where I brought in my last mission that I talked about, Artemis. So up till now, there is no woman who has yet landed on the moon. That is quite an amazing fact, but it's not happened yet. And of course, this is because the moon, human manned, the manned moon exploration mission only happened quite early in time, and there has been no man on the moon for many years, for many decades. So Artemis, that's why, is not only aiming to bring back humans on the moon, but that is one of their objectives, to take the first woman to the moon. But yes, because the human exploration moon program was when there were very few women astronauts, so it never happened that a woman landed on the moon at all. So in the next Artemis is going to start its first mission in 2022 or so. So in the next few years, you will see the first woman on the moon. And in that astronaut team, there are a few women I've already mentioned who already have gone to the ISS or on the shuttle.
So hopefully in the coming year we're gonna witness some of the
Yeah,
great
that
cosmonaut.
yeah, that is one of the big objectives of the Artemis program. And like I said, that's why it is called the Artemis program, named after a goddess who was the twin
Goddess.
sister of Apollo. So it is a prime objective, and it is the objective is also diversity, because they also plan to firstly take humans back to the moon, because for several decades it's not happened. So,
Ma'am, how ISS stay in the zero gravity?
okay, so ISS, yeah. So ISS is actually in low Earth orbit, where it's not exactly zero gravity. It's called microgravity. So it's very, very less gravity. And in fact, that is one of the main functionality of how astronauts use ISS. So of course, their spacesuits and the ISS environment is equipped to help you with this. But and what's happening is the ISS is kind of a in between point. So it helps astronauts acclimatize to this very low gravity and how to live and work in that environment, so that they are ready for actual zero gravity if they go further out into space. So right now they are able to stay in that microgravity with the help of their space suits, and or when they're inside, even the ISS is equipped for to help you. The ISS environment is help equipped to help you with that. But they're also doing experiments like growing plants in space. They have to exercise in space. All these things are a way to deal with the fact that, not the plants, but the exercise is a way to deal with the fact that your muscles are not, not having gravity work on it. So you need to compensate for it on a daily level by doing a lot more workout and things like that.
Ma'am, is there gravity on the moon? Ravindra
Yes,
Kumar.
yes, there is gravity, but on the moon, but it is one-sixth of the gravity that we face here on Earth. So again, the spacesuits that the astronauts wear when they go to the moon, and as you may have seen old pictures of astronauts on the moon where they were hopping, they're able to hop because the gravity is so low compared to what they experience on Earth. So the spacesuits will need to compensate for this low gravity, and that will be part of the design. So yes, there is gravity, but it's much lower, one-sixth of that on Earth.
All right. So with this, we'll end this session. So thank you, Mila ma'am, for sharing such a beautiful presentation. Clearly give us a broader perspective how women have come through the long way. And as we say, sky is not the limit for women. In the coming time, we'll gonna witness some of the great missions having women with them. And thank you, participants, for your active participation during the session. Thank you. Thank you for joining. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you to the planetarium for inviting me for this event, and to I enjoyed being a part of this interaction. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.